This week on Quality Digest Live, 3 views on Kaizen.
Plus, a story on 2 of my favorite topics, quality and money.
Money.
That and more when we come back.
Welcome back to Quality Digest Live for May 13th. Hey, that's Friday the 13th.
Friday the 13th, that's right. Auspicious day.
Watch my chair collapse. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Dirk Ducharme, Editor-in-Chief of Quality Digest.
That he is, and I'm Quality Digest publisher, Mike Richmond. Well, you know, Dirk, 1 million pounds is a lot of weight, you know? I'm just going to put that right out there. It's heavy, man.
Yeah, it's
heavy.
It's heavy stuff.
It's heavy, man.
Yeah,
well, if you're curious about what 1 million pounds actually does look like, I want you to take a look at this following picture from NIST, and we're going to post it up on the board so we can all see that. Now, that right there is 1 million pounds, which is, I think, if my calculations are correct, 500 tons. I'm not talking necessarily about the 4 folks there with the hard hats. That would be a lot of weight for each of those people, but they're probably less than 1 million pounds. You know, and I have to, as an aside, I think the hard hats are kind of cute. You know,
like they're going to do you a lot of good. Yeah. Here's this 1 million pounds are going to fall. Oh yeah, that hard hat's going to do a lot of good.
It's like a walnut shell with like an elephant.
You can use it to scoop up what's left.
It's not going to.
We'll just kind of put it in the hat here. And
hard hats are not going to help a whole heck of a lot. But hey, it's cute that they're wearing them anyway. You know, always be prepared. Well, the article that this picture comes from is titled "NIST's 1 million pound weight stack restoration is complete," and that appeared recently on the Physical Measurement Laboratory portion of the National Institute of Standards and Technology website. And we linked out to it in Monday's issue of Quality Digest Daily. And you know, it's an amazing story if you read through it, because as usual, we see that there's really pretty much no task too big or too challenging for the NIST team to accomplish. They do all these sorts of amazing things that we report on here pretty regularly. The article describes what was a 16-month project, and in that project they dismantled, cleaned, restored, and recalibrated about half of those humongous stainless steel discs in NIST's 3-story stack of weights. The device had not been taken apart actually since its original creation, installation back in 1965. So it's been 50 years, more than 50 years, of that thing sitting there. And you know, there's deformations that happen and things like that. So they took it apart, and obviously that's a huge project. Each of those things is
50,000. I think there's 20
something like 22 stacks, like 50,000 each or something. Yeah. Crazy. So NIST's 1 million pound deadweight machine, it's utilized by aerospace manufacturers and military laboratories and commercial force calibration labs, all of whom calibrate their force measurement equipment against this super accurate device. And the machine's expected to be back online later this month. And again, I think that it really talks to NIST as a place where you go, where you can get, obviously, you know that everything's going to be calibrated properly and accurately. But I mean, you know, think about the projects to keep everything in place. And something like this, I mean, that's a huge project.
And a lot of people have asked, you know, what do you use a 1 million pound dead weight for? And there's things like measuring the force of thrust.
Yep.
You know, thrust, basically, I guess they have things like a scale that measures rocket thrust, and or you know, weight of various really large aerospace parts.
Right.
But actually, there's another use for it. We've got an office cat here in our office. Excuse me. Yeah, and actually, the 1 million pound dead weight would just about weigh our cat.
PJ. Pigpen Jr.
He jumps up on your desk and like the legs creak, and he pushes everything off your desk, makes himself right at home.
That cat is not quite 1 million pounds, but he's not far off.
Not far off.
That's a big cat.
All right. Okay, researchers at the Georgia Institute of Technology are working on a technique to assign a unique code to individual cells on a microfluidic chip. The technique uses a simple circuit pattern with just 3 electrodes to assign a unique 7-bit digital ID number to each cell passing through the channels on the microfluidic chip. The new technique also captures information about the sizes of the cells and how fast they are moving. And then that identification information could allow automated counting and analysis of the cells being sorted. And this is according to Georgia Tech researchers. The research, reported in the journal Lab on a Chip, could provide the electronic intelligence that might one day allow inexpensive labs on a chip to conduct sophisticated metal testing outside the confines of hospitals and clinics. Now, if that sounds a little bit familiar, we were just talking about some technology from a company called Theranos last week, and we'll get back to that in just a little bit. So according to the story, Cellphone Principles help microfluidic chip digitize information on living cells. On the Georgia Tech website, the new technique, dubbed microfluidic codes, uses a grid of micron-scale electrical circuitry beneath a microfluidic chip. So if you can imagine, you can see the chip part of it right there. There's also some circuitry underneath. So think of a very small sandwich, of which part of it accepts a fluid,
right.
And then underneath is some circuitry which does some magic in terms of measuring individual cells on that. And kind of the way it works is that current flowing through the circuitry creates an electrical field in those channels that we just saw. And when a cell passes through one of those channels, it creates a signal that provides information about the cell's location, its size, and the speed at which it is moving through the channel. Unique identifying signals from multiple cells can then be separated and read by a computer, and this allows scientists to track not only the properties of the cells, but also how many cells have passed through each channel. It's all pretty amazing stuff.
Yeah,
now, because the cells sorted in each channel on a microfluidic chip have certain characteristics in common, the technique, and this is what we've been getting to here, would allow the automated detection of, let's say, cancer cells, or bacteria, or viruses in a fluid sample, maybe other stuff you might check for in blood. Researchers have demonstrated that they can track more than 1,000 ovarian cancer cells with an accuracy of better than 90%. Ultimately, the researchers hope to create inexpensive chips that could be used for sophisticated diagnostic testing in physician offices or remote location. Chips might even be contained on cartridges that would just automate the entire testing process. According to Fatih Saroglu, an assistant professor in Georgia Tech School of Electrical and Computer Engineering, quote, "Decentralizing healthcare is an important trend, and our technology might one day allow many kinds of diagnostic tests to be done beyond hospitals and large medical facilities." Now, if that sounds familiar, it is almost word for word what Theranos CEO Elizabeth Holmes has said is her goal, and the goal of Theranos is to take away these really expensive blood tests that require you to go to a specialized lab and instead put those in the hands of places like Walgreens and that sort of stuff, where you can go in, get a pinprick, get a very small amount of blood, put it on a microfluidic device, which is what Theranos' patented technology is, and draw a bunch of conclusions from a very small amount of blood. Do hundreds of tests is what Theranos is claiming on a very small sample of blood. Now, the reason I bring Theranos up is they are in the news quite a bit right now because they haven't released a lot of data on their technology.
Their Edison device.
Their Edison device, and the Edison was their first device. They actually have many devices. The Edison was one of the first devices that they made, and they come under a lot of criticism because people aren't trusting that they're being upfront with what their technology can actually do, and because nobody's seen any data. You have people saying, well, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work. I wish they would show us some data so we could actually tell if it does work. And Theranos has always claimed that the reason they haven't shown any data is because they are worried about the intellectual property and worried about giving people a heads up on exactly what they're doing until everything is totally locked down. Now, a lot of people have kind of poo-pooed that, but the reason I mention it is this Georgia Tech story is just one of probably dozens of large organizations, including IBM, by the way, that are looking at microfluidics to do just the thing that Theranos is claiming to do. This is a competitive field, and whoever gets out in front of it is going to make a buttload of money. Now, Theranos already claims to be out in front of it with theirs. They haven't proven it, and that's kind of where all the problem is coming in. But I can believe that story that Holmes is putting out, saying, look, we just don't want to tip our hat yet on the technology. Now, is she just saying that? Is there really something else going on in the background? Maybe the product doesn't work quite the way they they hoped it would, and so they're kind of hiding the data. Who knows? But it's my point was there is a lot of competition in this field, and I wouldn't write Holmes and Theranos off just yet until they actually do release the data and we see what is actually going on with them.
Well, it's a question as we've been talking about is, is Theranos really considered a medical company, a medical research company, or are they really considered a technology company?
Technology company,
different ways that technology is vetted within those different spaces, and I think Elizabeth Holmes would say it's more of a Silicon Valley type technology company,
and
which
they're
protect it very closely.
Tight,
so, there's a little bit of a push and pull there going on, and I agree with you. I think we wouldn't write Theranos off yet. We're going to have to just keep our eye on it and see what happens down the road.
By the way, their president and COO, Sunny Balwani, was just let go, left, retired. Kicked out. Departed, let's just say. So there's stuff going on.
Always. That's just the way it works. All right. Thanks, Dirk. All right. The Order for Kaizen is an article that appeared in Wednesday's issue of Quality Digest Daily, and it was written by Harish Jose. I think that's how we decided we pronounce his name, Harish Jose. The piece details 3 very discrete approaches to Kaizen, the Japanese phrase that formed the heart of the Toyota Production System, or TPS. The most precise translation of Kaizen is change for the better, but many refer to it much more simply as continuous improvement. Lean really has become kind of symbolic or kind of have a symbiosis there with Kaizen. Well, however you choose to define it, Kaizen is really all about efficiency and flow across all value streams within an organization. To achieve the full benefit of Kaizen, however, you've really got to start somewhere, and it's this question of where and how to start that Jose considers here. He refers to 3 well-known Kaizen practitioners who had really very different, I think, opinions about the proper order for a successful Kaizen transformation. The first one he mentions is Taiichi Ohno, who we all know is recognized as the father of the Toyota Production System. Ohno took what Jose calls a semi-strategic view of Kaizen and believed that improvement should begin with a focus on operations before moving on to equipment and then to processes. Okay, very logical progression there. The second great Kaizen leader in the piece that is mentioned is Shigeo Shingo, who was not a Toyota employee, but a researcher who contributed one of the first systematic studies of TPS. Shingo's view of Kaizen, which Jose considers as tactical, believed that improvement opportunities should start by making things easier from the operator's perspective. This is all from the operator's perspective. So making things easier, then making things better, then making things faster, and only then making things cheaper, which is kind of a little bit of a turn of the head, turn on the head of what American companies generally want to try to do with quality improvement initiatives. The third man referenced by Jose in his article is Hirano, who is probably less well known than Ohno or Shingo, but whose contributions were every bit as significant, as he's considered to be the originator of the 5S process. I didn't actually know that, but when I read the article, I discovered that. Hirano's approach was strategic in nature, starting with point Kaizen, moving on to line Kaizen, plane Kaizen, and then finally cubic Kaizen. In essence, this is the progression from very local incremental improvements to those that involve entire value streams or whole organizations. So you can see he's kind of focusing on these very local things. Then by the time he gets to cubic Kaizen,
it's the whole organization.
It's a very three-dimensional look at it. It makes sense when he describes it in that way. Well, the real question I think I hear as I was reading this article that I came up with is, well, does Kaizen really work best from the bottom up, or does it function best from the top down? Well, I think probably both at the same time, right? I mean, when you think about it, lean at its heart is really, it's not a technical transformation. It's not a financial transformation. It's not a management transformation. It's not even really an attitude transformation. It's really a cultural transformation, and that means that everybody in the entire organization has to buy in and do his or her part to break from the past and find a better way of allowing work to flow. Flow is really the key thing that we're talking about here. And articles like this one, I think are really great because they get the creative juices flowing, and you kind of think about the change that you need to make for the better and how you're going to do that. But you can't, I don't think you should get hung up on those kind of the chicken and egg perspectives and arguments about which comes first and why. I mean, if you're a change agent in your organization, you really want to start, with the man in the mirror. You start with yourself, and then you begin talking to and working with everyone around you to see the waste that's many times hiding in plain sight, right? You want to start by looking at that and seeing that. And once you start, you want to move immediately, like now, or maybe after the show, in the direction of an improved future state. Even if those moves are kind of tiny at first, the simple act of starting is going to create a momentum of its own, I think, in your organization. So lean, to me, really comes down to a restatement of Newton's first law. Body at rest tends to stay at rest. A body in motion tends to stay in motion. So the idea is that you want to get moving, and regardless of whether you say, well, we're going to start on a line, we're going to start with a cell, we're going to start with management and top down, however you want to start, just start. I mean, start with yourself. If you're watching the show and again, you're a change agent, you're a quality manager in your organization, you want to implement a Kaizen, a change in your organization for the better, just start. Start by looking at waste and trying to understand and appreciate what is you're doing in your organization that isn't really effective, isn't flowing process, isn't flowing work across value streams. Once you do that, then you can start talking to people and involving other people and doing that. And whether it's, personally, I don't think it matters whether it's top down or bottom up. I don't think it matters.
Right. Well, I mean, other than you have to have a certain amount of top down, because I mean, even if you have something that's starting as
Right.
as Ona was pointing out, you're starting off, you're making things easier for individual employees
Right.
and so forth, and building from that. If you don't have support from the top, it's kind of going to, I would think, kind of dead end at some point. I mean, you've got to somehow be able to get support from the top in order to extend it or improve on it, I would think. I'm certainly you could do stuff on an individual level, but that's about as far as you could go, maybe.
Well, yeah, you have to involve. What I'm saying, you're not going to ignore either the top down or the bottom up. But what I'm saying is, you can start anywhere. You can start from the bottom, and you can bubble those ideas up, or you can start with the top. I mean, it doesn't really matter. Just start. I mean, my point is start.
You got to get
it going.
Yeah, don't.
But start with yourself. I mean, start with yourself as a change agent within your organization that wants to improve your organization, and then build from there. That's the most important thing. The takeaway that I got from that very, very good piece by Harish Jose.
Cool. Okay, well, if a little bit of lubricant is good, then more should be better, right?
I bet you're talking about tribology.
Hey, you are really smart.
I bet you are.
You are a smart man. Tribology. And this was an interesting little story from NIST, Make a Mint, using measurement science that talks about the measurement science of tribology, which I'll give you a definition here. It is the scientific and engineering discipline dedicated to the material science, chemistry, physics, and mechanics of friction, wear, and lubrication.
And it's very important with money. If you don't want your money to look shabby.
That's right. This is all about shabby money, and you might wonder why. Well, the author of the story, Richard Gates, is a chemical engineer at NIST, and he got a phone call from the U.S. Mint several years ago, and they had a problem with newly minted coins. They were sometimes getting inconsistent finishes. The Mint's no different than any other manufacturing facility. Their product happens to be coins, and they want every single coin to look exactly the same. I mean, you might think, well, what does it matter? It's only money, but it still matters. Mm-hmm. And also, by the way, an inconsistent finish tells you that there's something wrong with the process, so that it's not just that the coins don't look the same, which you can say, well, that's neither here nor there, but if they don't look the same, something's happening in the process which could be a bigger problem. And actually it was. Their dyes were wearing out too fast, and that was part of what they discovered in all this. So they had two problems. One were inconsistent finishes, and the other was where their dyes were wearing out too fast. And they suspected that it was the lubrication process during the coin production that might be to blame. So they were looking for a way to measure the lubricant left on the coins after minting. Well, fortunately, the author, Gates, had a method for measuring nanometers thick lubricant films on hard surfaces. He had been doing it for, I believe, disk drive heads. So it took several years of work and analysis, but eventually they figured out what was happening to the coins during minting. The lubricant was too thick, and it was causing a buildup on the dies that was limiting their lifetimes and, of course, causing damage to the coins or damage to the finish on the coins. So the key to the process was to create a lubricant layer that was just right, says Gates. Not too thick, not too thin. And their innovation, and this is kind of where it gets into tribology, was to burnish the coin blanks to create what they call a tribochemistry. So essentially what they're doing is affecting the surface, the actual metal surface of the blanks by burnishing them, and that surface then made it possible for just a very thin layer of lubricant to attach to them. It affected the surface in such a way that it allowed an ultra-thin layer of lubricant to bond just to the surface of the blank, which it then protects through the single strike of the die necessary to produce the finished coin. So it took a few more years of development, but eventually they came up with a monomolecular, that's a one molecule thick lubrication process that not only improved the quality and finish of the coins, but increased the life of the die by 300%. The U.S. Mint now uses this process to produce billions of coins each year, and it saves them more than $2 million annually. So there you go. Just that much oil.
A cool little application there of tribology, and yeah, you know, I mean, it's interesting because what happens is, I mean, he showed in the article an example of coins that were minted at the same time, and one was very dark and one was very shiny, and it was like, you know, this was because of this inconsistent lubrication.
Right, and it's also pointing to the fact that the die itself is not striking the same every time, which is going to wear out the die. Yeah.
So yeah, it's a savings and better product too. I mean, like I say, it's a manufacturing process.
It's a manufacturing process. Yeah,
you know, the product's got to be consistent like any other manufacturing.
Government actually cares what that money looks like.
Yeah, they do. I do too. All right, good stuff there. Thanks, Derek. All right, well, next article: 6 Steps to Creating Your Project Budget by Helena Liu, appeared in Tuesday's issue of Quality Digest Daily. You can see it right there. Well, the article offers tips on project management. Project management is something that we cover fairly regularly in Quality Digest, and it makes sense because if you think about it, almost any significant undertaking really is accomplished through projects, through you know, giving projects to people to manage it, making sure that there's certain strategic points that are hit and that those projects are brought in on time, and in this case, the example here is on budget. Well, too often really what happens is good projects that can significantly improve organizations are often derailed because those projects aren't budgeted, planned, and managed properly to avoid problems. And she suggests the following 6 steps to kind of overcome this. And I think these are pretty valuable things to look at for project management. So let's take a quick look at them. I'm going to throw them up on the screen here and let you guys look at them along with me. So 6 steps to creating your project budget. The first one is really look through lesson learned documents. And in this case, what she's talking about here is really reviewing past projects and interviewing stakeholders, making sure that you understand what happened in the past, because many times in your organization there were problems that happened with past projects that are in some way similar to the project that you're working on now, and you can learn a lot from how that got derailed by looking at what happened beforehand. Now, in many cases, she also mentions that there aren't many projects maybe that align with exactly the project that you're doing. In that case, you want to really interview stakeholders, maybe look for literature outside your organization about things that you're doing and that align with what you're looking to do on this particular project. So again, the first one there is look through lessons learned and try to understand. Second one is know your cost, and that's a really important one because resources such as people and material, equipment, and time really all have costs associated with them. So you have to understand, you know, what you're going to need, how much of those individual things you're going to need, you know, to bring your project in, and you know, you don't want to under budget in any of those things because you know you're going to find that you're not going to have the resources you need to accomplish the job properly. The third one, which is related to that really closely, is roll up individual activity costs. And what she's talking about with rolling up individual activity costs is the idea that you want to take those resources that you understood with your costs in the prior point, and you want to fix rates to them. You want to fix rates to those resources so you nail down exactly what you're going to need from each. You might need 50 hours from employee A. You might need 100 hours of plant time. You might need different things. You may need a certain amount of money to buy things or whatever it may be. Well, you need to nail down exactly how much those individual costs are, you know, by individual resource. You want to roll them all up. The next one, the fourth point, is to add in contingencies and to make sure that you understand that you have to build in some extra for unforeseen events. Those unforeseen events always happen. I mean, we all know, we've all worked on a project, and you know, you can budget it to the nth degree. You can think you have everything accounted for,
but you don't.
There's always something that happens. You're like, oh man, if we had only planned for that, right? Well, plan for it. I mean, you know, account for whatever it might be, a 5-10% budget, some flexibility in there so that you can have contingencies that if and when, it's not if, when they come up, you'll be able to account for them and you'll be able to move your project forward. The fifth one is monitor progress and resources. And in this case, you really want to be very close to the knitting of how the project is rolling out. What she suggests is have daily stand-up meetings, and quick daily stand-up meetings, 15 minutes, 10 minutes, where you literally go out to the Gemba, wherever the work's being done, and you talk to your people. You say, okay, well, here's where we're at in the project. What are you coming up with? What are you seeing as a problem? And you keep the energy going that way. People feel very much involved in that way. You're not spending a lot of time. You're not having an official 1 or 2 hour sit down once a week or once a month, whatever it is.
Also won't be any surprises either.
There aren't any surprises because you're doing it daily. So having quick daily meetings is much better than having longer, less frequent meetings. So that's a good way to monitor your progress and your resources. And the sixth one is communicate changes to all the stakeholders that are involved in your process. And in this case, you really want to and have to get out in front of changes, especially with management, in real time or as close to real time as you can. You want to be a relentless communicator. You know, if you're managing a project, you have to realize that transparency is always your friend. You know, we think back to any time, pretty much any time that anything goes wrong with a company, or a manufacturing company or a service company, where we have a quality escape or whatever it is, almost in every single instance, it's because somebody tried to hide something. Mm-hmm. Something happened, and somebody said, okay, let's not focus on that. Let's try to avoid it. Let's kind of slide around it. That's never a good thing. Right. Because it's always going to get found out, especially if you have stakeholders, especially if you have shareholders. I mean, we all have bosses, and those bosses are many times our customers. So be transparent, be relentlessly transparent, and be a communicator to everybody, up and down. Manage up, manage down, so everybody knows what's going on at all times. The moral of the story, I think, is that high levels, in my opinion, high levels of quality in an organization and flawless project execution really go hand in hand. I mean, you know, like I say, pretty much all work gets done through projects. And if you want to improve your organization, have a quality initiative that you're going to really push forward, you got to do it through a project pretty much. And you have to understand, and articles like this I think are really helpful. Michelle LaBrosse writes on this topic a lot too for us. You really have to understand what you want to do to manage your people and manage your resources properly to make those projects work. And when she's talking about bringing them in on budget, to me it's not just money. You know, I mean, money is a budget, but really time is a budget. People's intellect and people's ideas are a budget. You want to make sure you're maximizing the budget that you have available for you for working projects.
Yeah, if you can put up that slide again of the 6 points.
Yeah.
I would add that 4, 5, and 6 all come under scope creep.
Yes.
And that is one thing that you've got. So putting it this way, I would say 4 says understand there is most likely going to be scope creep, right. And in order to minimize it, you got to have 5 and 6. You got to constantly be monitoring what's going on, make sure people aren't adding things to the project that shouldn't be there, maybe don't need to be there. Might be add-ons you might want to do in a later project, but don't need to be done right now. Right. And also, you got to be communicating necessary changes so that people understand that, okay, look, we're having to add to the scope of the project. It really is necessary because something that we've discovered, and that has to be communicated all the way down, up and down, and also get feedback in, okay, so how much is this going to change the budget, given that we're adding something that we didn't plan on to begin with? So I think 4, 5, and 6 on that list are really important in order to keep scope creep to a minimum. You're always going to have it, but you got to watch it.
That's an excellent point. That connects very closely in with this idea. And the other thing that when you're talking about that I thought about is communication. Right? Is not really just you want to communicate with people up and down. You want the people on your project to communicate with you as well. You want to encourage them to be really transparent. Because you may not know, you know? I mean, many times you can't communicate properly and be transparent to your stakeholders if people aren't communicating with you. If you're the primary conduit of the project, you've got to encourage everybody to be really transparent with you as well. So that's a really important one too. So good point there, Dirk.
Okay, so now it's time for the tweet of the week.
Oh yeah.
Tweet of the week. This one comes from Gary Goodridge. Follow your heart, but take your brain with you.
Oh, look at that. It's a heart and a brain.
It's a heart and a brain.
So let me look at that picture for a minute. So if I understand it properly, that guy right there has neither a heart nor a brain in his body.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you look at it, actually, he's just a stick. So how could he actually have a heart or a brain in him? I mean,
wouldn't really. By the way, I think this is really apropos given that this is election season.
You mean
follow your heart, but don't forget about your brain.
I thought what you were saying is it's a typical candidate with no heart or
Well,
brain.
yeah, dragging their brain behind them. Yeah, so well, okay.
Yeah, at least it's in there somewhere. All right. Well, as always, check us out on Twitter, Quality Digest, for all those great tweets about hearts and brains and quality and management and everything else. All right. Thank you, Dirk.
All right.
All right. Well, that's our show for this Friday, the 13th episode of Quality Digest Live. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Check us out next week, of course, for another big week of Quality Digest Daily, starting on Monday, and we'll be back here next week with you. Next week actually is World Metrology Day, next Friday, the 20th. So we have some interesting surprises for you, some interesting guests for you on that show. So be sure if you're into metrology, come back and tune in for that show a week from today on Friday, the 20th of May.
That's it.
So you guys all have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.
So long.
Thanks. Bye.